get warm is to get 70 people in a room and sit close to each other. Welcome and thanks for coming out this evening for our talk on ocean planning. Maritime Gloucester is pleased to host this important conversation. My name is Tom Balfe and I'm the Executive Director here. Before we begin the program, let me share a few bits of information. Bathrooms are on the first floor. If you go down the stairs and sort of across the hall to the front of the building, they're there on the right. Exits are back behind you where you came up, as well as there's an exit over here through the back, and then down through our classroom and aquarium. I'd like to thank this evening's sponsor, Mill River Consulting, a local environmental consulting firm providing homeowners, municipalities, and businesses with civil engineering and environmental permitting services. In addition, these programs need your support through the donation box at the door to the Gordon's Gallery that you just entered, or through your membership. Our goal this evening is to enlist 5 new members, which will help support tonight's important talk. Join tonight, you'll get $5 off. So I hope many of you are members, and those of you who aren't, or your membership has lapsed, please sign up. Tonight's program is the first in a number of MG Talks programs we have planned for this winter. On Thursday, February 25th, 2 weeks from now, we've invited Gloucester Innovations' Mark Carlotto, Todd Rogers, and Tom Stevenson to delve into the DIY world of new marine sensing technologies that help us understand some of the important ocean issues facing our fishermen, scientists, and students of the environment. In addition to sort of presenting what's happening and what are these cool new tools, there'll be some hands-on activities to keep it interesting so that you really understand some of these ultimately cost-effective, inexpensive apps that are being used and developed. On Thursday evening, March 3rd at 7 p.m., panelists Vito Gigoloni of the Northeast Seafood Coalition and Peter Shelley of the Conservation Law Foundation will offer their views on the effort to designate the Cassius Ledge closed area and the New England coral canyons and seamounts as a marine national monument in the Atlantic. Gloucester Daily Times waterfront reporter Sean Horgan will moderate. This program will take place at the auditorium at Gloucester High, as we're expecting a reasonably large turnout for that event. And then on Thursday, March 31st, Ken Lento, project manager for National Grid, along with his engineering team, will talk about the extensive harbor cleanup activities that you could see behind us. I assume that many of you have been down to the harbor, and there's lots of barges and lots of cranes. They're going to use lots of photos and videos to really show you what this engineering activities have been over these last few months, and it really offers I think it'll be a particularly interesting opportunity to really understand what is going on and what will be going on. As it relates to all of that, small piece of paper is tucked into your brochure, your Maritime Gloucester pamphlet there, and that describes the talks and when they're happening. It also identifies our Harbor Lab series of some workshops, such as the lobster dissection. We found that not only young students like to do some stuff in the lab, but adults like to learn some of this stuff as well. And then obviously our educational programs, spring vacation and summer programs. Well, let's get to tonight's program, ocean planning. What can and can't be done in state and federal waters is an incredibly important topic. We're pleased to have 2 environmental professionals who have been actively involved since 2008 in the development of the Mass Ocean Plan. Bruce Carlisle is the director of Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management, and Jack Clarke is the director of Public Policy and Government Relations for Mass Audubon. He's also the chair of the Massachusetts Ocean Advisory Commission. The goal for tonight's program is to ensure that Cape Ann residents are engaged and informed of relevant access, use, and regulatory issues associated with this plan. This is not a public hearing. Jack and Bruce are here as our guests to assist us all understand this important plan. It is a great opportunity for those unfamiliar with the plan. It's a great opportunity to ask questions and learn about it. And for those familiar with the plan or impacted by the plan, it's a great opportunity to share a perspective or get clarity on a particular issue. To assist in the conversation, we're pleased to have John Sarrouf, a Gloucester resident, who's the Director of Program Development for the Public Conversations Project and one of the founders of Gloucester Conversations. John facilitates dialogues across the country on a wide range of issues and teaches in the Department of Communications and Peace and Conflict Studies at Gordon College. Finally, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Melanie Murray Brown, Director of our programs, who deserves the credit for putting together a great 2016 MG Talks series. With that, let's turn it over to John.
Great, thank you so much. And I think there are some seats available for people in the back. If you want to take this opportunity to just, if you have a seat that's empty near you, might point it out for people, so people want to come forward. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody at Maritime Gloucester, for this opportunity. It is obviously an important issue to us in Gloucester, as evidenced by how many people were here, how quickly this program sold out. It's an important opportunity, I think a unique opportunity to really understand from people who have been deeply, deeply working on this issue for a long time. As with any of these issues, especially around our oceans, we care about this, and we have different perspectives. So this might be an opportunity to explore some of those, and we ask that we do that with respect for each other and for the differences and the care that each of you brings to this. So the way this evening will go is that Jack will spend some time framing up sort of the origin of the plan and where this all came from in the larger frame of things. And then Bruce will explain the planning process itself and what we've observed since it's been implemented. I'll have a little bit of back and forth between the two of them. I might ask some questions. Then we'll open it up to the floor for people to ask questions that they're curious about. We're going to try to wrap up at about 8:30. Might also be a good time if you have a phone that might make noise or anything else that might go beep to put that on silence. All right?
Right. Thank you. Appreciate it. John? All right. Well, first I want to thank Tom and Melanie and everyone for inviting me here. I appreciate it. And as Tom said, I'm chair of the Mass Ocean Advisory Commission, appointed originally by Governor Deval Patrick and then recently reappointed by Governor Charles Baker under the statute, the Mass Ocean Management Law. And I also work for Mass Audubon. And most of you are familiar with Mass Audubon, but I don't represent Mass Audubon on this commission. I'm the environmental representative. So the legislature established different disciplines for representation for the governor to appoint on the board. So I'm the environmental representative. Also, as many of you know, I'm a Gloucester resident. And we're talking about ocean planning. And I chaired the planning board for 10 years, and with the late Janice Stoluto, we did a master plan for this city. So I'm a big believer in planning, especially when it comes to our natural environment. And when I talked to my board of directors at Mass Audubon, they said, well, shouldn't we have, as we have the Wetlands Protection Act, the Rivers Protection Act, shouldn't we have something like the Ocean Protection Act? And my response was that we can have our ocean protection through good management, because it recognizes a variety of different subject areas, from economic development to conservation to good management. So that was sort of the origin of why I got involved in this endeavor. So we're going to look at the overall context. The Oceans Act that the legislature passed in 2008. Legislature did a lot of great things in 2008. They established greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. They established a requirement for green electricity. They did the Ocean Management Act. So the legislature did a lot of great things then. And then we went ahead, a group of us, and put together the act. So why do we do ocean management in Massachusetts? One of the concerns was that we were seeing a lot of things happen in the waters, state waters, not federal, but state waters. And we had done a lot in Massachusetts with area of critical environmental concern plans, like for Plum, the area around Plum Island. We did harbor management plans. We have a state coastal zone management plan. But what we didn't have at the time was something looking at the blue water, offshore. What is the plan? And the things we were seeing was first come, first served basis. We were seeing wind farms planned in state waters off Hull, in Buzzards Bay, important archaeological resources, recreational boating, commercial fishing, navigation issues, underwater cable lines, all new technologies. And the way the permits were being granted in the Commonwealth was a first come, first served basis. So we were seeing conflicts. We were seeing places proposed for dredging sand to re-nourish eroding beaches that would close as important fish habitat. So working with the Romney administration, we got together and the Romney administration established a task force. There are about 28 people on it, 2 environmental representatives. I was one of the environmental representatives. And we looked at the growing interest and activity in state ocean waters, and we did an evaluation. We held public hearings all over the state. We worked for almost 2 years, and we put out a report called Waves of Change. I think it's probably available on the website. You can still find that report. One of the critical recommendations of the Waves of Change report was we need to have a plan. We need to have legislation that requires the Commonwealth to have a plan for managing state ocean waters. And so we took that recommendation to the legislature, drafted the Ocean Management Act, took several years. It moved its way through the legislature, and as I said, in 2008, it passed. And it requires, it's a statutory requirement, not just a good idea, requires the state to put together a management plan. And then there are 15 directives. We call it Oceans 15, the 15 things that the Commonwealth has to do in terms of the plan. We look at siting priorities for all different things, location standards. Especially important is the identification of what we call special, sensitive, and unique areas set aside in the ocean. They might be sensitive and special and unique because they're right whale, North Atlantic right whale habitat, or because they're important eelgrass habitat, or the underlying seabed floor is important. So there are a variety of different things important for coastal water birds. So there's a variety of things that we look at. And then we want to foster sustainable uses and then support infrastructure necessary for our coastal and our ocean economy. And that's kind of the mix. And then the legislature, by the way, in the Massachusetts State Senate, where the bill really originated, there were 2 leading proponents for the oceans, as you can imagine. From Cape Ann, Senator Clarke; from Cape Cod, Senator Rob O'Leary. And it was funny, I had picked up when the Senate passed this bill, there was a headline in the Cape Cod Times that said, "Senate passes O'Leary Ocean Act." And then I picked up the Gloucester Daily Times, it said, "Senate passes TAR Ocean Management Act." And I made a poster, and it's hanging in Bruce Carlisle's office, if you look at it. I always give him a hard time. But Bruce was there, Senator Tar was there, looking out for the commercial fishing interests of his constituents, of his district. And he was very, very clear that this act does not regulate commercial fishing. And as we're drafting the act, I talked to the David Bergeron, who was with the Massachusetts Commercial Fisheries Partnership, said, work with us on some language. We've got fishery management plans in Massachusetts, and we're doing an ocean management plan. Let's bring the 2 together. And the legislature came up with language from the Fisheries Partnership that said the state fishery plans are integrated into the ocean plan. And the beauty of the state ocean plan is that the state can't do anything unless it's consistent with the ocean plan. So that means it can't issue a permit, take an action, undertake any kind of activities, permits and licenses in the deep ocean waters, unless those activities are consistent with the ocean plan. And now that commercial fishing, marine fishery plans are part of that, they then have standing in terms of being honored by all state agencies. So the legislature established 2 groups, Ocean Advisory Commission that I chair, and that's not an oversight board. we're advisory. We're advisory to Bruce Carlisle as Director of CZM and Secretary Matthew Beaton, the Head of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So we advise. And the legislature established all the seats in that advisory commission. The legislature also established a Science Advisory Council because science underlies the policy that is advanced in the plan. So you'll see that we have, in addition to myself, we have Lobstermen's Association, Renewable Energy, we have the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is our regional planning agency for this area, and other regional planning agencies represented. Town of Nantucket, and then Senator Dan Wolf, who took Senator Robert Leary's place from the Cape and Islands. Senator Anthony Petrocelli. Last week was his last week in the legislature, so we're going to look for a change there. Representative Frank Smizek and Matthew Muratori. And then, of course, the agencies are CZM, Division of Marine Fisheries, and DEP, as the regulatory agencies that actually implement and advise the plan. So what are we looking at in terms of areas that are managing? So the state territorial sea goes out to 3 miles. So that's the edge of the border. And as I said, we've got a state coastal zone management plan. We have harbor plans. So we decide to stay away from the immediate coast and start out around low tide. So if you go to the extreme low tide mark, or about 1/3 of a mile offshore, that's where the jurisdictional area starts. And so that's what it looks like for the parts that are under jurisdiction. So,
Great.
okay, all right, Bruce, you're up.
That was excellent. So Jack really set the stage, sort of laying the groundwork, explaining how the Commonwealth got to the passage of the Oceans Act in 2008. My job here is to take you through how we got from that act to a plan, and most recently to an update, the first ever update to the state's plan. This is a really complicated slide. I don't expect you guys to read all of it or digest all of it. A couple key things I want to sort of just highlight. And this is one of the themes you're going to hear me talk about, is a commitment on the part of the administration, of the Ocean Advisory Commission, of the Science Council, to using the best available science data information, and to ensure throughout the whole process stakeholders are engaged through different aspects, through our 2 formal bodies, the Commission and the Council, through workshops, listening sessions, stakeholder meetings, public hearings, so on and so forth. And then going through aspects of planning, looking at functional compatibility between different uses, between natural resources and uses, and coming up with the policies and ultimately what the plan management and administration is. 4 goals for the plan. These are really flowing from what Jack talked about in the Act, what we call the Oceans 15. The 15 principles get sort of integrated up, bound to protect the interests of the marine ecosystem, including the natural, social, cultural, historic, and economic components. Okay, it's really important. So we're saying not just the marine ecosystem, but the water-dependent uses and the other aspects which form the whole of that ecosystem service. This one is more towards the marine ecosystem, biodiversity, ecosystem health. This one's about wise use of marine resources, sustainable uses, including fishing, certain infrastructure necessary for the economy and quality of life. And then really, really importantly, this plan is not intended, and I hope one of the takeaways that you leave with tonight is that we have a commitment to constantly iterating this plan, adapting, evolving it. And that's what that last goal says. So I mentioned before this commitment to data and science and to stakeholders. So how do we do that? Well, in addition to the things I talked about, we stood up these 6 different technical working groups. And we asked the folks who know, who are the experts in these different subject areas. Habitat, fisheries, marine transportation, marine ports, aspects of marine sediments and coastal marine geology, recreational cultural services, energy and infrastructure, to bring their information to us to work with us to develop the spatial data, the maps, the science priority, identifying what the data gaps are, which really form the framework and the basis for the plan. So just a couple, quick examples. There, I could just, John saw some early slides. I could spend 20 minutes going through different maps of different information. But just to give you just a flavor for spatial information that we're integrating into this plan. On the left, we've got humpback whales, and this is effort-corrected sightings. And on the right, we've got the same effort-corrected sightings for North Atlantic gray whales. Now, this is data from maps from the 2009 plan. So one of the things I want to point out is that as part of our commitment to updating the plan, this pattern is starting to shift over here. We're starting to see, and elsewhere in Cape Cod Bay, behavior and trends of North Atlantic right whale and their critical core habitat is changing. And if we don't change with that, we're not protecting that. Whoa, that's weird. This is where we don't have any data. No, this is where I don't know what happened to that image, but this is again 2009 slide, and this is the result of a tremendous amount of effort from my office, from our partners at USGS Woods Hole Science Center, from NOAA, from our Division of Marine Fisheries, so on and so forth, doing a lot of work on seafloor mapping, on sediment characterization, putting forth really the best roadmap, base layer, if you will, and we'll get to some of this later on, of what's going on in the seafloor. On the right, you see data directly from Division of Marine Fisheries around some of their fisheries assessment and some of their resource assessment trawl work based upon their different sampling strata. On the left here, we're seeing sort of a bunch of different infrastructure and shipping and transportation and commerce kind of all sort of loaded onto one map. And on the right, another map from DMF around fisheries reporting from their statistical areas from DMF. So when we first released the plan in 2009, it really set up the framework for management. It's got three different areas. Most of state waters are what we call a multi-use area, so that the uses, activities, facilities that are allowed under state law are allowed in these areas subject to siting and performance standards. There are, and I'll show you a map later on, a couple areas designated as the only suitable areas for commercial scale offshore wind. And then coincident with the Cape Cod National Seashore and the Cape Cod Ocean Sanctuary, there's an area prohibited for essentially all uses prohibited by state law. The plan identifies and maps, as Jack said, critical, important marine and estuarine habitats, and also really important areas for water-dependent uses, and I'll get to that as well. And contains siting and performance standards for new uses, new cable projects, new renewable energy projects, things like that, that direct those activities away from these important areas. So really starting to create that blueprint, that roadmap for managing oyster uses. The plan also has some elements for administration. So places a premium on interagency coordination and uses existing state law and state process through our MEPA process, which is the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act, which is a consolidated review process. So why create a new review process when we have one we can already utilize? The plan has protocols for how we can update the plan or how we can do a more formal amendment and what that means. And really, almost as important as the management and administration is a whole volume, which is called the baseline assessment and the science framework. So the baseline assessment really takes stock of the status and trends of the ecosystem, the social system, the political system, the different uses. And the science priorities really lay out a 5-year agenda for trying to chase down the data and science that we really need in order to do our job better. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but in 2013, we started a plan update process. And we went out and we asked folks for some input about how they thought the first ever Massachusetts Ocean Plan was working. And this is essentially some of the sort of higher level takeaways, that they recognize that there was increased protection of marine life and habitats, that there was strong support for maritime water dependent activities. We heard from the development community that there was reduced uncertainty for new proposed projects. As Jack talked about, there were some proposed projects that didn't move forward, but that was a clear signal. Why invest time and energy and resources in pursuing a project that ultimately would get denied or litigated or whatever? So really important takeaway there, and you can read those as well. But some of the takeaways that we got from the first generation. So as I said, and this is this important theme, and the Act formalizes, every 5 years, the secretary in my office needs to review the plan at a minimum. In 2013, we started both a review and an update process. This is a really sort of condensed slide. The process certainly was not this condensed, but there were 3 sort of overarching goals. As I mentioned before, going back and making sure that the data that's in the plan is the best and the most current. Identifying trends since 2009, and we can talk about some of those. And advance the planning for emerging uses. And sorry about that colon, but the 2 uses that we are particularly focused on, and we'll talk more about this, is siting transmission from offshore wind projects that are potentially moving forward in federal waters down in the southern portion of the outer continental shelf off the Commonwealth and off Rhode Island. This talks a little bit about some of the process in terms of some of the public meetings and workshops, the role of the Commission and the Science Council, and so on and so forth. So in 2015, we released the first ever update to the state's plan. Not only were we the first state in the nation to have an ocean plan, and our neighbors and partners down in Rhode Island following just shortly thereafter, but we were also the first state to formally update our plan. A couple big takeaways. So what's the difference between the 2015 plan and the 2009? On the left, you'll see some of the management areas I talked about. So that striped area is the multi-use area. This is the prohibited area. These are the 2 areas in state waters that were identified as the only suitable locations for commercial scale wind. The plan in 2009 identified some provisional areas. Well, a lot's changed since 2009. Okay, so at or around 2007, 2008, the federal government is launching a whole outer continental shelf leasing program for offshore wind. They're standing up intergovernmental task forces. They're doing a lot of work such that in 2015, we've got areas that have been identified by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and these have leases, and this is, I'll show you another map later on, but there are 4 lessees, 4 leased areas. You guys know the trials and tribulations of Cape Wind, shown there in Nantucket Sound. And then, so the notable change is these provisional areas we've taken off the table. There's no need for them. We do not see how even provisional commercial scale wind is compatible or suitable in state waters at this point in time. This is a pilot project of Muskegon Tidal Energy with a preliminary permit from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They hold a preliminary permit to study that, and we are continuing to track it, but they're sort of still in study mode, and not really sure if that is going to move forward. And then the last important thing we did was for these areas that we said were suitable for commercial scale, we said, well, since there is this interest in process and progress in federal waters, these would really only be suitable at this point in time now for something much smaller, for what we call community scale. I think a lot of the economics and aspects of that are still sort of limiting any foreseeable development, but that's where we landed in that part of the plan. A couple other quick things, and I know we want to get to a conversation. This just gives you a sense of some of the protected areas and whether or not, based upon the new data, the areas that are mapped and protected in the plan change. So majority of them did. We had some new information on sea ducks, which is really good. You can sort of read through the rest. And similarly, for our protected water dependent use areas, did the mapped area change for all of these? For most of these, yes. For 2 of these, no. So I mentioned in terms of the emerging uses, and I'll just talk quickly about what the 2015 plan says. For offshore wind energy transmission, the plan identifies a couple of preliminary corridors, and again, this is based upon best available information, input from commercial fishing sector, from communities, from stakeholders, and calls for further work to survey and characterize these areas. But at this point in time, these preliminary corridors are representing what we feel as a Commonwealth as the most suitable and least impactful areas for locating these potential transmission cables that must be buried and maintained over time when that's to happen. For offshore sand, the plan recognizes that this is really a very sort of high interest activity. First and foremost, the plan says that community-based projects, which is the sort of eligible type of project, must prioritize the use of dredged or upland material first and foremost. Don't go straight to looking to offshore sand. And then calls for the formation of an offshore sand task force to really further chase down and get some more input and data information from interests to inform the Secretary, to inform the Ocean Advisory Commission and others around this topic. And you can see some of the charges to that task force. And then lastly, for aquaculture, for certain ocean-based aquaculture, which is currently not subject to any siting or performance standards in the plan, putting together an advisory group to recommend whether or not that or certain thresholds of that type of activity should potentially be subject to the plan. Real quick, the Oceans Act called for an ocean mitigation development fee. We didn't really have any guidance around that. We spent a lot of time working on that. 3 classes of projects sort of ticking up with some general sort of thresholds for what that fee would be. And then, as I mentioned before, a new set of science priorities, and you can sort of read through them. But really importantly, monitoring climate change across Massachusetts waters, things like warming, ocean acidification, trends of biological responses, ecosystem shifts, really important signals that we are seeing happening now. We've seen trends over years happening there, and you guys can kind of read through them, but really placing a premium on habitat mapping, on working to better characterize some of our commercial and recreational fishing uses, so on and so forth. So I think that's what I have for now. I've got some additional slides just in case we want to get into some examples, but I'll leave it at that and hand it over to John.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to chime in if there was anything particular you wanted to clarify or note from what you heard.
Well, there's a couple of things. One of the things and I wasn't associated with any of this, but as we had recommended this legislation, and the legislators were saying, why do we need something like this? There was a place called the Knowns site, and it's off Winthrop. And this site off Winthrop was identified by the town of Winthrop as a good spot to get sand, dredge the sand, and put it up on the eroding beach. If you're familiar with Winthrop Beach or Point Shirley, there's a seawall. There's a seawall along Winthrop Drive. So there's no beach at high tide. The storms are big waves that moved sand all over the place. So the town of Winthrop said, well, let's go to the state and see if we can get a permit to go to this known site right off Winthrop shores and grab the sand and put it on the beach. Well, at the same time, Paul Diodati, who was the director of the Division of Marine Fisheries, said, wait a minute, that site has been set aside as a habitat recovery zone for groundfish, cod, haddock, and flounder, mostly flounder. So you can't go in and start dredging sand, and this area DMF is shut for fish. And so it's the question is, why not? Says the town of Winthrop. We put our permit in first. And so this project had gone through the MEPA process, as Bruce mentioned, the Mass Environmental Policy Act. So there was a environmental notification form, like a simple environmental impact statement. And the town of Winthrop, as the advocate, said this is what we want to do. And the Division of Marine Fisheries could only comment to the regulatory agencies that were issuing permits. They could just say, no, it's important, we set it aside, with no standing, no regulatory oversight. Nothing Marine Fisheries could say to DEP when they were issuing their permit that they can't do it. A real conflict, a good first example of first come, first serve. Today that wouldn't happen because the fishery plans that would set aside that area are part of the ocean plan, so that wouldn't happen. The other thing, as the plan was, the first iteration of the plan was being completed, Jay Cashman, the owner of Patriot Renewables, had proposed 60 wind turbines in Buzzards Bay. And while the plan was being put together, Buzzards Bay was being identified as a special, sensitive, and unique area for roseate terns. Roseate terns are at the top of the endangered species list in Massachusetts for coastal water birds. And once that designation started to appear on the plans, that plan disappeared. And the applicant knew that, now this is a keep outside, we're going to look elsewhere, which they didn't do. They kind of folded up and went away. So it was used in a couple places. And Bruce, you want to mention the cable crossings, Woods Hole?
We might be able to get into that.
Okay.
Let's see what John has.
Well, no, actually, I'd love to. I mean, I think the examples that you
This
gave.
is the application of the plan.
That's it. I think the examples you gave help give some of this a little bit of grounding. So any places where you can point to and say, this is what it was like before, and this is what the plan was meant to do, and here's an example of how it's working.
Right. Yeah, so, and I think a couple of the examples are what didn't happen. And I think that's a really, really important signal. And I think we go back to the Patriot Wind project, which, as Jack said, was for 3 different areas in Buzzards Bay, each with about 20 turbines. And then just sort of thinking through the marine resources, not only the terns, but some of the other habitats in Buzzards Bay, and equally important, the existing commercial fishing and recreational fishing activity, all the recreational boating that happens in there, the significant marine transportation and commerce that comes up through Buzzards Bay, goes through the canal and continues north through there, just made it really clear when you're doing siting and compatibility assessment that the siting of that scale of offshore wind in that area just did not make sense from a management framework. So, the project didn't go forward. Agencies don't lose precious time, commenting and permitting and potentially in litigation. It's just a really strong signal to potential development and development activities, not just in Buzzards Bay, but using the maps and the siting standards in the plan about what can and can't happen. There are, exemptions, and there are special case situations, almost like a variance, if you will, if necessary, but that's down the line. The project that you guys were talking about, which is a really good example for how this works in sort of real world, is a what started as a fiber optic cable from Falmouth to Tisbury on the Vineyard for a really important telecommunication need that the island needed, all the communities on the island, with Comcast, using the maps and data in the plan, the project proponent putting forth a proposed pathway that avoids some of the sensitive benthic resources, includes provisions for burial depths, so that people are able to mobile gear fish over the cable and stuff like that, should they choose to. We can get into that. So they come to the agencies, roll out some maps. We look at the plan, we look at the maps, and we say, looks good. Here's a couple areas we have some concern about. So they went out and did some really detailed survey work, and based upon what they found, they came back with a modified route. This is all while they're about to file for their permits with MEPA and with state agencies, and ultimately with the Martha's Vineyard Commission, because it's on the Vineyard, Cape Cod Commission, because it's on the Cape, both as projects of regional impact and their local permits. At the end of the day, because the plan contained good information about where to avoid these sensitive resources. They were able to do it through MEPA. They had to do some work up front, but after they passed through MEPA and the different jurisdictions, Cape Cod Commission, the Vineyard Commission, our agents were able to sort of all see sort of this. Their permitting after the fact went much easier and much quicker, and it met the standards of the plan. And at the end of the day, they recognized that this was such a great opportunity. NSTAR had been thinking about, we need a redundant electric cable to the vineyard. One of the directives of the plan is, where possible, let's co-locate. They ended up bundling the fiber optic cable, the electric cable, one single cable installation, very small impacts. Really just a good example of what we want to see and where we want to sort of change our collective behavior, which is sort of proactive management. So that's one example.
It sounds like you're dealing with an enormous amount of data from a lot of different scientists, a lot of different sources. How are you dealing with it all? And you talked about seeing some trends. I wonder if there are any particular trends you could talk about, maybe specifically that we're seeing that would affect our waters close to where we are.
Right. So in terms of data, I guess the first thing I'd say is, I am lucky to have on my staff 3 GIS, spatial data management, and with other natural resource management expertise, without which none of this would ever happen. But really, it goes beyond those 3, because what we do is, this isn't CZM's data. I mean, yeah, we're really involved in certain data sets, really helping to be the primary data developers. But for so many more, we're looking to the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium, which is all of the different academics, federal agency folks, whale watch entities that are compiling their professional sightings, whether they're survey work or their whale watch work, into this regional database. And it's not just right whales, by the way, it's all marine mammals. And we're able to pull from that really the best available marine mammal information. So it's having expertise, it's having partnerships, and being able to go to folks like our Science Council and say, hey, we've got some issues here about, data scale and extent, and how do we, what's your scientific input on how we marry these up? Can we marry these up? In some cases, the answer is no. There's just, they're done so differently, you guys are going to have to, go one way or the other. So it's taken a lot of effort, continues to take a lot of effort, but we'd be really nowhere without all these different data streams coming in. And that's just one example. Our sister agency at Division of Marine Fisheries, close partners on all of this, and these guys really are the data generators on everything having to do with commercial and recreational fishing. Just deep data over there and just a lot of expertise, and we'd be nowhere without them. In terms of the second part of the question was trends. So I mentioned that that one shift, so over the past 10 years, we're definitely seeing a signature with the North Atlantic right whales in terms of their activity in Cape Cod Bay. A shift absolutely to the west, the western side. So, and bigger. So you'll see that shift. We've seen similar types of shifts, and I'm sure commercial fishermen in the audience know this better than anyone else. Shifts in different species distributions. And DMF is really trying to tease this out in their trawl survey and other resource assessment work. Clearly folks have heard a lot about, the groundfish, the cod, climate forcing factors, water temperatures and stuff like that. So really trying to capture and chase that, lobster, winter flounder, things like that. So, but we're also seeing some sort of macro, energy changes. So you see that, just in the past 7 years in terms of the offshore wind, the federal process, and where we were sort of looking into state waters to help sort of with our, renewable energy portfolio needs, and really recognizing that, hey, let's put a pause on that because, our experience is telling us, and the European and other markets are showing us that these can be done farther off the coast, in deeper water, where we can locate in areas which potentially have sort of the least impact. So that's one example. But we're seeing, as you guys all know, shifts in our energy sources from domestic gases, which is going to drive different patterns. We're seeing some pretty significant energy demands in the Metro Boston area, which need to be met. And we're seeing proposals for high voltage transmission potentially coming from Maine, Quebec, northern Canada, developing renewable resources, hydro resources that need to make their way down. Can they go by land? Can they go by the marine environment? These are all larger conversations, but if they are coming in the marine environment, we need to be prepared for that. And that's really what sort of good planning is all about. So I'll let Jack chime in on some of those, but
that's good.
Definitely a lot of trends.
Great. So we'll open it up to the group. The way we'll do this, if you could raise your hand, I'll call on a few people at once so we know what the order will be for a few hands. If you could just say your name, speak loud enough, because the Cape Ann TV is recording this, and we invite your questions. So we'll go here, there, and then over there.
So, Michael O'Leary, I have a question. You talked about the proposal of wind farms in Buzzards Bay, and then they kind of went away. But in the instance where there's so many agencies and entities involved, who does someone go to? I mean, like from this company or a fledgling corporation, is it a particular agency they would go to, and this agency has the plan in hand, and they can say?
Well, that's a good question, Michael. So if someone's proposing to build, let's say, a wind farm facility in state waters, I think the first place they would go to would be Bruce in the Coastal Zone Management Office, because the state CZM program is networked with all of the other agencies. So you want to do the planning and those discussions before actual permitting.
Yeah, and if they, for some reason, weren't familiar with the ocean plan, there's a process already in place for projects of a certain scale or threshold go in to file with our state MEPA office. So that's the very first step. If they went to do that without having stopped and considered the ocean plan, the folks at MEPA would be like, oh, okay, great, glad you came in, but why don't you go meet with your friends at CZM and DMF and others and come back to us after you've talked to them.
But does anyone who has kind of like final say, or is it like, are you advisory, or you just say, no, that's not going to get done?
So
I'm advisory, Bruce is not.
yes, so the way it works is the Act directs, state law says that state agencies must issue their license and permits or otherwise undertake their authorities and their decision-making processes consistent with the plan. So there's a process that we've set up in the plan. As the project, so MEPA is the first step, and then after you go through MEPA and you receive your final certificate from the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, you go to permitting. As they leave MEPA, their certificate needs to affirm that they've met the siting provisions of the ocean plan. Then they would go to get their Wetlands Protection Act, their local permits, their water quality certification, our federal consistency authority at CZM, where we would ensure that the management standards in the plan are met, and we would not be able to offer an approval if it was otherwise not consistent.
So there's sort of a trip list, Michael. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That in this agency has to act before that agency. So
If you don't get if MEPA would deny a certificate, is there an appeal process? Can they say, well, who else, can we go over your head to appeal this to?
So MEPA isn't really a permit.
You said a certificate.
Yeah, so a certificate is that you've essentially complied with the information and alternatives analysis and vetting sufficient for agencies to be able to conduct their individual permitting. But the certificate could further condition a project and could further state certain facts about certain alternatives being proposed.
But what if you
Is there some appeals process?
if you deny a certificate?
Your appeals process in the MEPA would be to go to court, essentially.
There and then back there.
Very briefly, wind power, especially the ocean wind power. A lot of these areas which are under consideration, the bottoms are relatively barren, sand and so forth. I would think that the uprights, the foundations for the wind towers cells would act almost as artificial reefs and enhance the marine life rather than harming it.
That's a good question. So I went to,
Did everyone hear the question?
it's about the foundation basis for wind turbines attracting marine life. So when I went to Denmark to look at Horns Rev and Newstead, the two offshore wind projects in Denmark. And when I went out, the first thing I did was look at the foundations, and they were full of crustaceans. So they are attracting to a certain extent.
Yeah, and so the literature, not just from that project, but from other European and other projects, do find that. So it will definitely attract certain species who like a certain type of structure in a certain environment. It may potentially also displace other species, pelagic or otherwise. But, they tend to be very sort of specific to the, geophysical environment setting that the potential project would be in.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have updated maps? The most recent you had was 2009. It's 2016. There's a big difference in the temperatures, a lot of things.
Yeah. So the plan I held up when I was showing you the two volumes of the plan, the 2015 volume 2 baseline assessment represents our best understanding and what's available in the literature as of about September 2015.
Okay.
As with any plan, the minute you print a map or put some words on a page, it's dated. I will say we stuck to the statutory directive to review and update the plan, came in on time and on budget to do that. It was a massive undertaking, and we will do it again as necessary. One of the other important things is, so that was a full-on plan. It was an amendment, essentially. Formally, it was called an amendment. We've got provisions that allow us to do what is called an update, which would keep the plan, keep the management structure, but we know that we've got new data on X. Let's bring in that new data, update the plan. We don't have to go through as formal an amendment process. There is, public input and public, engagement provisions in that, but it's not quite the same sort of delta as a tool available us to keep it current.
Is this an every 5-year thing, or is this when you see significant enough changes?
The statute says we must review it at least every 5 years. It doesn't say we must amend it every 5 years.
I know that at the ocean planning meeting in Boston last year, NOAA, different departments could not get data from other departments. Has that been worked out? In their own organization, they should be able to get different data from different departments.
So I won't really be able to speak to sort of NOAA interdepartmental stuff. I will say that when we first started this in 2008, and actually before this, because we knew that the task force had recommended legislation. We knew that different bills had started in committees and passed, as Jack said, the Senate and stuff like that. So we weren't sitting around on our hands. We were going out and gathering as much data and information around the marine environment as we could. I will say we had a really difficult time getting some of the federal data on commercial fishing, for example, VMS, VTR information, as well as other data sources. But that was then. This is now. One of the things we can talk about later on is an effort in the Northeast region to do what we've done in Massachusetts on a regional basis, on maybe a little bit of a lighter approach, without quite the same teeth, but really with an emphasis on best available data, synchronizing the multitude of federal agencies up in this neck of the woods, with the state jurisdictions, with our tribal partners, and with the Fisheries Council. And I can talk about that a little bit later.
Here, and then Kathy, and then down here. Yes, please.
I heard you talk about a bunch of different uses for the ocean, including the sand redistribution, or whatever it is. I'm curious to know what studies have been done for minerals under the ocean, and if I wanted to mine them, who would I talk to do that?
So in state waters, you could only extract minerals for the purpose of beach nourishment or shoreline stabilization.
What if there was gold or something down there and I knew it and nobody owns it? What do I do?
You would
Oh, no,
have
the state owns
to
it.
you would have to change state law.
What's the state law? I'm curious.
It's the state law that contains the allowances and prohibitions for state waters is called the Ocean Sanctuaries Act.
Okay. So does that mean now the federal government would not be able to come in and extract anything?
In federal waters, you would go talk to your friends at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is formerly the Marine Minerals Service.
Oh, I didn't know that existed. Thank you.
Yeah. So a question back there, and then.
And Kathy Eccles. Would 10 Pound Island out here be under the jurisdiction of this management plan?
No. So as
It's a third of the way from the coast. I don't know how far out that is.
yeah. So no. The short answer would be it would be landward of the ocean planning area.
And two more questions. One is, this sounds a little more sensitive than I mean, but I guess I hear a lot of sort of how to use a system. But if I were a creature in the ocean, or you know, in a natural habitat that needed protection, what as a creature could I count on you protecting? How could I count on you protecting? Where's your edge around caring for those who don't have a voice?
So who represents the
Audubon
creature?
Society.
You do.
Yeah, we protect those endangered species. So, on you know, there's a host of laws that protect species. First, with endangered species, there's state and federal endangered species laws. Like they both protect the North Atlantic right whale that Bruce was talking about, whose habitat's expanding and changing in Cape Cod Bay, and that's some of that is done through the state's Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program. So there are state laws and state agencies that protect endangered species.
And so all of that is integrated in your plan. I mean, it's all.
Right. So we use the so let's back up to one of the plan goals. One of the directives of the plan is to identify and protect special, sensitive, and unique estuarine and marine habitats. Okay. So through this planning process, we've essentially asked experts, asked the marine mammal, you know, the benthic infauna, the marine birds, you know, marine fish resource folks. What are the, you know, most critical species or habitat resources, and really try to identify those core areas that truly are going to be off limits to certain types of development. So I don't know what critter you had in mind. Maybe we could talk about what critter you had in mind, and we can talk about where that might fall. The other thing that Jack is trying to say is that that's just a plan. So we do have those, but you know, sort of backstopping the plan is just a plethora of other authorities, laws, and regulations, from endangered species on down to essential fish habitat stuff in Magnuson, on down to our state's Wetlands Protection Act, which is at this core, you know, one of the most protective, that provide additional standards.
Valerie?
Valerie Nelson. So I looked at both the 2009 and 2015 plan, and I think that in 2015, there are a lot of reassurances that there's not going to be a lot of new industrial extraction and harm to the fishing industry. The precautionary approach in sand and gravel, the recognition that maybe inshore wind is not a reality. All that, I think, is a great direction. But there are two areas that stand out as danger zones in the 2015 plan, which I'd like to ask you to answer. The first is you continue to work on the important habitats, and is there identifying and mapping those? Is there any chance that within state waters you will do what the National Monument is proposing to do in federal waters, which is to say that's a sensitive area, so no more fishing, no nothing. Are you moving towards the possibility that you will kick fishermen out of certain areas because you've decided that they're special as you do your science work? And the second related question is the aquaculture. You use language about finfish aquaculture. I could not find any information about your advisory committee. If the state is going way rapidly into finfish aquaculture, there are a lot of people in the fishing industry in our community that have big problems with that. So where are you headed in aquaculture, and are you suggesting that with your work on sensitive areas that you could potentially throw fishermen out of some of these sensitive areas that you define?
So I'm going to do the first question, and Bruce will do the second. Sure. So on the first question, when we sat on the Romney administration's task force, kind of sorting this all out, the Mass Lobstermen's Association was represented through Bill Adler. Vito Calamo represented the state's Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, and there was discussion. Everything was on the table, including marine protected areas, which are off limits for a variety of uses around the world. As the legislation was being discussed and as it was being drafted, it became very, very clear that marine protected areas were not going to be a part of it. So this was management. This was not, you can do this, you can't do that. It was guidance and that sort of thing. As a matter of fact, I can tell you, the day I had my final discussion with Vito was after church at St. Anne's, and it was in the parking lot, and I said, Vito, I need the advisory commission to support the bill. He said, can you promise me, standing right here, that there's no marine protected areas, the fishermen won't be shut out? I said, yes. And then
that still stands.
And it still stands, and then we had the blessing of the Commercial Fisheries News, editorials, and we didn't have any opposition from the fishermen. We had the Marine Fisheries Partnership joining full on board to be at the table, and we have representation from the Marine Advisory Commission on the council. I think it's Papalato, is it?
No, so he was the former fisheries representative. Now it's Beth Cassoni from MLA.
Oh, that's right. She was at the previous meeting. So that kind of keep out is not there. So.
And just to put a finer point on that, the statute says, and we talked about this, but it says specifically that the management and regulation of fisheries shall remain the sole authority and responsibility of the Division of Marine Fisheries.
It says that in 3 places, language that came from Bruce.
So
What
the
about the aquafarms?
well, let me get to that. So obviously DMF has certain closure areas for fisheries management. That is the only authority for prohibiting, managing, otherwise directing where fishing, commercial and recreational can and
So
can't
birds
happen.
or whales or eelgrass, they're not going to put fishermen out of areas.
So I think our response, answers that question. The second question is pertaining to aquaculture. So right now, as it stands, aquaculture is an allowed use in state waters. It's an allowed use. You could be a single blue mussel line, or you could be a 30-acre net pen, aquaculture, fish farm, whatever. They're both allowed. DMF has additional standards and is the sole regulator, again, of that. And they have different classes for different facilities, and there's a review process. But right now, those project types aren't subject to the siting standards and the management standards that are in the plan. DMF chairs our Fisheries Technical Advisory Group, our working group. So I mentioned those 6 working groups. And before we get to the next generation.
If people wanted to be involved in that, learn what's going on, keep up to date, how would they do that?
Yep, I would say, I mean, obviously all this is on the Ocean Plan websites. In order to sort of, hear more about it, I would suggest that they subscribe to our monthly email list, CZ Mail. And again, you can do that right off CZM's homepage. You can come up and give me your email address. But when we get that going, we'll be public noticing it in the environmental monitor. We'll do some listening sessions regionally. Those will be noticed in papers, things like that. But we do a lot of proactive stuff on our monthly email.
Great. Here, and then there, and then I just want to make sure I get people in the back because I'm doing a lot. So they're there, and then over here. Yeah.
I'm just curious, how would this act have affected the permitting process of the LNG terminals we have offshore here?
How would it have affected the LNG
Would it
terminals?
have been harder for these permits to be?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's hard to say. It's hard to look back and say what would have been different. I think that we would have had a much better foundation on which to say, okay, well, this is a necessary project in the public interest. We have more authority and more information on where specifically your pipeline route would go. Might even be a different sort of scenario where, based on what we know then, what we know now, potentially come up with a finding of, do we need two, do we need one type of thing. It's hard to look back. Times were different, but certainly I would say any project moving forward would be in a completely different world. We have very clear siting and performance standards for cables, for pipelines, long linear projects. They need to meet those standards. They're very pretty strict. So hard to say.
The reason why I ask is because in the act there's a lot of emphasis on protecting commercial fishing and the fishing habitat. And there was hours and hours of testimony by the fishing community about how this is gonna, severely impact commercial fishing, and it still got pushed through. So I'm just hoping that, a project like that is not gonna get streamlined through without being severely scrutinized the way,
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think, we have a better informational foundation on, commercial fishing activity, areas of interest, and
all that information was available then and it still went through. That's the point I'm trying to make.
What about the systematic?
Hold on, wait, just, it's okay, we'll get, sir.
Yeah, my name is Joe, and I'm a commercial fisherman here in Gloucester my whole life. My question is, when you put up the maps of the permitting, as a commercial fisherman, all that area that you showed on the map, it's all being fished, every single inch, whether it's mobile gear, gill nets, recreational, or whatever, lots of people. So, when the gentleman on the right said that fishermen will never be put out, the first time that you will issue a permit for whatever reason, you will be putting fishermen out. So how do you answer that? I mean, every piece of that ocean that you showed on that map, we use. So the first time anybody comes forward, for whatever reason, and that permit gets issued, you're putting fishermen out of business.
So if it's being used for something else, then it can't be used for fishing, is what you're saying?
Because fish is being used there 100%. That area.
So I appreciate that sentiment, that concern. We take our directive from the legislature, from state law, and state law does allow other uses and activities in the marine environment. We think that the framework that we have today is better than no framework at all. We feel as though we can make better decisions about where projects that are in the public interest, that have gone through the vetting and scrutiny, and that may ultimately get cited, should reflect the best available information on marine ecosystem, marine habitats, and marine uses. So if there truly are areas that are of higher value and interest to commercial fishing, we want to be able to reflect that in the plan. So we recognize that every inch of ocean waters is potentially fish. We also recognize that every inch is also habitat of type. So we need to balance those different interests as directed by the legislature. And we're still learning on this. This is, pretty new. We still feel as though our framework is better than no framework. Does it need improvements? Will we learn as we go along? Yes, we will.
Can I just follow up?
Yeah, sure.
So if fishing community got together and came to use for a permit for a certain amount of area that you determine on those maps, could that permit go through?
So, I'm not quite following you.
We have,
For an
let's say we want a
exclusive-
certain amount of area to go, that we do fishing.
An exclusive lease or something?
Right, so because we have to our logbooks, we mentioned BTRs, we fished there for 40, 50 years.
Okay, so there's two different
I
issues.
just want to
there.
make sure, can people hear in the back? Okay, the question was, if fishermen got together and came and said, could we get a permit to exclusively fish a particular area? Could they get a permit and have use over that area exclusively?
Yeah, so I can't really answer that because that's a sort of a legal question that we don't really have any precedent for. I wouldn't say it would be out of the realm of possibilities because we do lease areas for shellfish aquaculture, for example. But there are conditions and it's not exclusive. So people still have the right to fish, fowl, and navigate. It's one of our public interest rights. So you may not be able to tromp over a oyster rig, but at high tide you could run a kayak over it, right? Something like that. But you wouldn't be able to run a fiber optic cable through there. But the second point, and I want to explore this because we rely upon our partners at DMF to really help us identify these areas that are of importance to the industry. And these guys have, compared to what our partners have in the federal government, these guys have a really good handle on their resource, and their pod assessments are top notch. 30 years of data, they can analyze it every which way. But we do welcome the opportunity to get direct input from certain sectors about certain areas based upon your fishing experience that are more productive, that are of interest to you, because that's how we can make better decisions.
And the reason I'm asking is because, like Al said earlier, we lost a lot of areas with the 3 LNG terminals that were just built 12 miles outside of Gloucester. So it's already happened. And now with your plan, with the plan that you're bringing forward tonight, it just scares me that commercial fishermen are just going to get pushed out. Even though the plan says that they won't, I don't believe it because it's already happened.
So you're inviting input.
I am inviting input.
How would that happen?
Number one, we can sort of make sure I get these guys information. Number two, right now the commercial fishing representative on the advisory commission is Beth Sony from Mass Lobsterman. Formerly it was Papalardo. There's different interests. So absolutely talk to Beth. She's not just representing the lobster industry. So and if you run into issues there, by all means talk to friends at DMF or other folks there. We're happy to come sit down. I'll give you my card. So essentially the door is open. We want to hear from folks. We don't need to do it at a public hearing. We more than willing to go sit down in our fish pier office, CZM. We've got a small office down there. We'll find some afternoon or evening and roll out some maps or some plots or whatever you guys want to do. I'd like to do it with our partners at DMF. They're the fishery managers.
DMF over the years has come down, and we've mapped out a lot of maps, and we just showed them that we use every single inch of that the way you showed tonight as commercial fishing. And so that's what worries me. I mean,
You hear that?
just want
Thank you. Yeah.
My question was related to that. Basically, when you showed all the stakeholders up there, I saw the Lobster Association people, didn't see any fishermen. Who have you talked to so far for actual real fishermen to collect your data?
So again, we rely upon DMF to be our primary data stream for mapping fish resources and commercial fishing activity.
No fishermen?
So there are fishermen on the fisheries work group. I don't have the names or individuals at the top of my tongue right now, ma'am, but we can open up that volume right now, turn to the appendix and find the list of the working group members. Certainly the commitment is there, continues to be there. Folks feel like we're, not engaging well enough. Happy to hear that, and suggestions for improving that is, we're receptive to that.
Okay. Paul, we want to hear, yeah, because the name was up earlier.
Kathy Page. You use the term emerging uses in your overview here, and you did list out transmission of offshore wind. Does the plan have a comprehensive list of emerging uses? And if it does, are there other uses that may not have been discussed or included in the plan that could be amended with this plan? That would be number one. Number two was that very heavy chart you had of developmental fees. If you would even consider, I'd like to see that back up on the screen. I'd like to know if that is, the fees are conducive to just renewables. Are you going to, these fees for extractive, non-renewable uses, industrial extractives? That was pretty interesting chart. We really didn't get a chance to look at it. I'd really like to get a quick discussion about that.
So emerging uses, and then
Is there a comprehensive list?
Yep.
And can it be amended?
So we, in terms of emerging uses, we've identified those, transmission of offshore renewable energy, potential extraction, dredging of sand for beach nourishment, and different types of aquaculture as being the primary ones that would be allowed under state law. We could think of other stuff, but it wouldn't be allowed under state law. So, the extraction of fossil fuels, for example, not going to happen in state waters.
It's the Ocean Sanctuaries Act.
I don't know, you could throw out some other potential emerging uses, floating nuclear stations, casinos on boats, of which, we still have some, I don't know. We do our best to look at the ones that we're hearing from constituents that we know based upon our best professional experience that are, kind of ready for some, proactive management and stakeholder engagement.
And how did we create the fee structure?
No, I got it. So the fee structure is, I mentioned before, the Ocean Act calls for projects that are subject to the plan are subject to a fee. That's, that's pretty short speak for transmission projects, cable projects, pipeline projects, sand extraction projects. Projects that are allowed by state law in state waters, if they were authorized, would be subject to a fee. So that was the statutory language. We heard from a lot of different stakeholders on the regulated community side and on the advocacy side who said, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to us? So we worked since the very beginning on trying to put together a sort of structure and guidance around this. This is ultimately the table, the fee structure. There's a lot more language in the plan about how it's applied. I could go into that if we want to. It's at the Secretary's discretion based upon the application of this guidance. The fees go into an Ocean and Waterways Trust, which is managed by the Secretary, by CZM, and by DMF. For work that goes back into plan and stewardship and better management of our oceans.
Okay, so if sensitive resources, industrial resources were done in federal waters, the state would allow the transmission of those to shore through a pipeline or other methods, and this would come into play.
I'm not saying that any project would or wouldn't be permitted.
Well, federally, if we had federal.
If there was a project in
projects
federal
that
waters
would
that
get
needed to
the
come
state
through
shore,
state waters to
right.
make landfall, it would be subject to the plan. It would be subject to the spectrum of state and local authorizations, state, local, and regional authorizations,
All right.
including but not limited to the ocean plan.
So I want to pivot because we're getting close to the end of our time, and we talked about wanting to think about regional and international implications and federal implications, I guess, perhaps as well. Are there things that you want to talk about in terms of thinking regionally, what the implications are for this with international situations?
I can talk briefly. So after Massachusetts passed the first Ocean Management Act in the nation, we thought, well, if it's good for Massachusetts, it certainly should be good for the rest of the country. So we lobbied the advocates, we lobbied the Obama administration, and the president issued an executive order because it would never get anything from the Congress. So he issued an executive order saying, we need to do this kind of planning in federal waters. And so there was already an existing group in the Northeast, and Bruce can talk about that. And that group of folks from Atlantic Canada and the New England states around the Gulf of Maine had already been looking at the regional importance of Northeast waters. And once the executive order came out, they formally became what was called a regional planning body under the executive order. And they have put together a draft plan for federal water. It's certainly different in terms of its regulatory implications, but it's going to serve as guidance for the federal agencies on how they work there. And then there's a group of advocates called Northeast Ocean Advisory Council, Northeast Ocean Advisory Network, that is kind of overseeing this from an outside point of view. And Bruce, you're on the regional planning body.
Right, and I don't know how much time we have. I've got a couple slides on the Northeast process. I think it might be helpful just to, folks just bear with me 1 sec. Let me see if I can't find these over here.
While he's doing that, I just want to say we are going to wrap up in a few minutes. There are probably more questions, but we also want to save time for people to come up. Both Bruce and Jack had said that they'd hang around for a little while. I imagine some informal conversations may happen. We want to save time for that and respect the generous time that they've provided with us. So
yeah, so just real quick on that. So on the Northeast Regional Ocean Planning, as Jack said, National Ocean Policy, by the way, first ever National Ocean Policy. I guess enough said there. Finally some leadership for our oceans. Issued in 2010. The part that calls for it, the ocean policy covers a lot of different aspects around ocean science and stewardship, but the part that calls for regional ocean planning is a sort of voluntary effort. So for regions that want to engage in this and explore this tool, the ocean policy strongly supports it. The policy in this part of ocean planning was based directly on experience in Massachusetts, experience to our friends to the south in Rhode Island, and our friends on the West Coast in Oregon. The 3 states who really are internationally the leaders in ocean planning. In New England, we were the first region in the nation to form this regional ocean planning body. The representation in New England is 2 representatives from each of the New England states. So the representatives for Massachusetts are myself from CCM and David Pierce from DMF, the 10 federally recognized tribes in the Northeast, 10 federal agencies, and the Fishery Management Council. This just sort of talks about some of the efforts, but similar to our experience in Massachusetts, placing a premium on data acquisition, on synthesis, on getting together key work groups and engaging with the public. The first release of the draft plan, this says expected March, is sounding more like April, but I think the takeaway is this spring. And I won't go into all the different maps I have, but this is great. This is the Northeast Ocean Data Portal, and there's already a ton of information, spatial information on human uses and marine life, and it's about to get really soon a whole lot better. A significant investment in the best available marine mammal maps, marine birds, so on and so forth. So we're paying close attention to it. We are participating. We will be using our advisory commission, our science council, and we will be asking our partners at the federal and RPB to be coming to the Commonwealth to run public listening sessions on the draft plan when it's ready this spring and summer.
Take 2 more questions back there, and then, okay, we'll take 3 more questions. There, and there.
Okay, the question I had is, you mentioned the difficulty of removing sand in winter to bolster up the eroding beach, and I'm wondering how that applies generally to the coastline. So what kind of jurisdiction do you have over the coastline, which instead of having sand, has granite rocks? Can someone come in who owns that area there and remove rocks, or can they build on it if they couldn't build on sand?
I know what this is about. And I'm a member too, so we'll leave it there. As a citizen, not Audubon. I'm a member.
So this is, yours does not cover you don't regulate the coastline?
Right, but the initial part, right, that's a good point, John, but the initial part of the question was extracting sand, let's say, from offshore and bringing it onshore. And that's a critically important issue for eroding beaches that we've identified. And in our plan, the state just got through with a coastal erosion commission that Bruce Carlisle put in the FY 2014 budget. So the commission just issued some recommendations, and one of them is to look at a pilot area offshore for extracting sand and finding eroding public beaches. This is the public interest, and where would be a good spot to do that? And so that's all part of our discussion, and the state's going to put together this working group that Bruce talked about, this sand sort of task force to look at appropriate areas and where that would be. But when it comes to putting sand on eroding beaches, the Commonwealth looks to public beaches, not private beaches, to do that kind of work first.
Well, what about the removal or the change in the configuration of anything on the coastline which is directly abutting state waters?
Critically important with big state interests, so projects like that would go through the local conservation commission overseen by the Department of Environmental Protection, the Army Corps of Engineers, depending upon the size and the scope of the project. CZM might look at it, perhaps MEPA, with environmental impact statements. There's a whole host of permits to do that kind of work. But if it's right on the coast, it's outside the jurisdiction of this plan as to whether or not it's consistent with the plan. But there's a whole host of other permits and regulatory reviews that would have to be gone through.
So here and then back
Is
there.
that right?
Sure, Mike McManus. Can you give a quick update on Cape Wind and the deep water natural gas terminal off the coast here? Like, I thought that was mothballed.
So good question. So Cape Wind still holds its lease from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Cape Wind no longer has a power purchase agreement with a utility, so doesn't have essentially an offtake agreement. So it's hard to for the project developer to finance the project without an offtake agreement. So that's sort of where Cape Wind stands.
Stalled.
Okay.
Let me just answer there are 2 deepwater LNG ports, terminals. One of which, about a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, filed with the MARAD, which is the Federal Marine Administration, which has the authority over deepwater LNG ports, to essentially temporarily suspend activity. So they're still there, but they are no longer active according to their filings with MARAD. The other one has not. They're technically still active.
And lastly, sorry, yeah, are there any other huge projects like that, going on in our state waters?
No, I mentioned there are some people looking at potential for a high voltage DC cable, transmission cable, that would run from somewhere, Maine, New Hampshire area, potentially down to some of the grid down in the greater metro Boston area, but there's no specific proposals. We know of no pipeline or other related projects.
Last question, Marcia.
Thank you.
Marcia Hart.
Okay,
I was wondering how a citizen finds out who's applying for the permits and the details of any particular project that's being reviewed and who gets approved.
Yep. So the state uses a publication, an online sort of digital publication called the Environmental Monitor, which is really your go-to place for all of the state license permit, MIPA filings, other public notices that pertain to environmental issues. If you went to mass.gov/MIPA, you'll be able to find the Environmental Monitor. I think you can sign up for a blast when the new monitor gets published. Essentially, it gets published every 2 weeks.
So anybody who applies will end up in that.
Anybody who's subject to the ocean plan would end up in that.
There was a hand that was up for a while. I'm sorry because from my vantage point I didn't see you, so please.
Hello everyone, my name is Angela Sanfilippo, and I just couldn't leave here, but I don't have a question. I just want to give a very brief history about all this. I was involved for about 4 to 5 years with the ocean planning, and there were fishermen there at the beginning, and as the years went by, they started fading away. Things became very complicated. And the biggest disappointment was, at the end, was that we really hoped that fishing grounds would have been really identified, that we know there is important fishing grounds within the 3 miles. What it happened is that at that time already there was a law passed, there are a certain size of boats could no longer fish within 3 miles, and people who had permits for the 3 mile just because their boat, and they've been fishing there all their life, but because their boat was over that size, they could no longer fish. So no reporting of these activities were taking place. And so they had no data for it. And that was like the biggest loss, because these areas exist within the 3 miles, but they were never identified. There is fishing that goes on, it's a lot of lobstering fishing, but we're talking more about groundfish fishing that just, like, it disappeared, but that doesn't mean that the ocean bottom where this happened, and it's still my hope, and I'm also the executive director of the Massachusetts Fishermen Partnership. We've been very much involved with that, but I'm still hoping and praying that it's not too late, that there's still fishermen, and I keep saying there's fishermen around that have this information so it could be identified. Because I remember Bill Adler, because he was there all the time too, looking at me and said, Angela, listen, what happened? It's business as usual. There is nothing in those maps that says that these areas are primary fishing ground and they should be protected from everything. So I just wanted to say that because I want the people here tonight to know that there were people involved in the beginning. But that was, in the commercial fishing industry world, that was the biggest disappointment that really happened with that. So, thank you.
Can you just follow up real quick when you mentioned that the terminal applied for a suspension? How long is that good for?
I'd have to check. I think it's indefinite, but it may need to be.
Is there any way through this act, if they're not going to use it, you can force them to get it out of it?
Let me look into that and get back to you with an informed answer.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you all. We did want to leave time so that we could have informal conversation amongst each other and with Jack and Bruce for just a little bit. They've been generous enough to say that they'd hang around. I want to thank Tom and Melanie Murray Brown for making this space for us to have this conversation. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Jack, for all this wonderful information.